Okay, welcome to the first lesson on critical thinking. And we're going to start with the first and probably the most important question type, and that is called summarizing the main conclusion. Now, the way these questions will look is you will have, first of all, your passage that you have to read, and then you will have a question that roughly matches this. Which one of the following best expresses the main conclusion of the above argument? When you see that, you know you are dealing with this question type. Our objective for these questions is basically to identify the conclusion and then just select the answer that most closely matches that conclusion. Alright, so how do we approach these questions? Well, it's quite simple. We just have a three-step process. And the first step is to read the question. So you never start with reading the passage. Don't do that, that'll just waste your time. You always read the question first. Then once you've read the question, you will know that it is a conclusion type question, and then you can start reading the passage and actively looking for the conclusion. And when you find the conclusion, I recommend that you underline it. And once you know that, you just match the conclusion with the best possible answer. Now don't bother writing this down to your notes or anything. I'm going to do a few practice questions with you and show you how it's done. Okay, but before we can actually do that, we have to be 100% certain on what a conclusion is. Now, maybe you think you know what a conclusion is, but trust me, pay attention to this, because if you don't fully understand what a conclusion is, you are not going to get any marks. Okay, so first of all, a conclusion is the most important opinion of the author, and extra emphasis on opinion. A conclusion is always an opinion. So that is very important. A conclusion is not evidence, it's not facts or anything like that. No, it is an opinion that the author has. Okay, what else can we say about conclusions? Well, a conclusion is the reason the writer wrote the passage. Now, the author will have written the passage in order to convince you of something, and that something is going to be the conclusion. And lastly, you can also think of the conclusion as the essence of the text. And what I mean by that is, if you got rid of everything else in the passage, then the main point that the author was trying to make still stands. So make sure you remember these 3 points, because this is what you are looking for in the passage. Now, oftentimes in a passage, there are certain signals that will actually indicate that you are dealing with a conclusion. What I mean by that is that in a sentence, there will be like a trigger word that sort of tells you this is the conclusion. At least in many cases, this will be true. So what are some conclusion signals? Well, the most obvious one would be in conclusion. So if I said, in conclusion, school hours should be reduced, well, that would be my conclusion. But obviously, they're not going to be this simple in the Imat. They obviously want to make it a bit harder for you, so it's not likely that it'll be in conclusion, but it could be something like to sum up, or therefore, or thus, or hence, and so on. I'm not going to give you a list of all the words because really that list doesn't exist, but just keep this in mind. If you see a word like this that is sort of leading up to an opinion or to a final point, well, then likely the conclusion is going to be in that sentence. So this ties in with that point that the conclusion is the most important opinion. If you see a line like, it thus stands to reason, well, that signifies that the most important opinion is coming up. Now, tying into the second point, which is that the author's conclusion is the reason the writer wrote the passage. So really, in most cases, that'll be in the form of the author trying to convince you of something. And then certain trigger words could be the following: should, could, must, it is vital that, it is of uttermost importance that, or thus we need to, stuff like this. Again, I can't give you a complete list, but these types of words indicate that a conclusion is coming up. Now, I should mention that just because you see one of these words in a sentence, it doesn't necessarily mean that the conclusion is in that sentence 100% of the time. It's just that it makes it more likely. So do exercise some common sense. You should be on the lookout for these words, but you shouldn't be blind about how you interpret them. Okay, really, that's all the theory you need for this question type. Now you just need to get good at identifying conclusions, and you do that through practice. So what I'm going to do here is give you a very simple paragraph, and I want you to find the conclusion. So please pause and attempt. And I'll assume you've done that now. Okay, so let's read this paragraph. Bob works in investment banking and has done so for 10 years. He therefore must make a lot of money. After all, he has studied finance and has a lot of experience. What is the conclusion? Okay, so remember, what is the most important opinion of the text? What is the author trying to convince us of? And what really is the essence of the text? Well, the first line here, Bob works in investment banking and has done so for 10 years, that's not even an opinion. That's just a fact. He's just stating that Bob works in investment banking and has done so for 10 years. There's no opinion involved. That cannot be the conclusion. Now, what about the next sentence? He therefore must make a lot of money. Yes, that is an opinion. He therefore must make a lot of money. That's not necessarily true, but it is what the author thinks. And it's also what the author is trying to convince us of. And we can see that from the next sentence. After all, he has studied finance and has a lot of experience. So the author is trying to back up his opinion with extra facts or evidence. And on top of that, we actually have some conclusion signal words here. He therefore must make a lot of money. So therefore and must, that signals that the actual main opinion of the writer is coming up. So that again, it just strengthens the fact that this is the conclusion. So therefore, this is the conclusion. It's the most important opinion of the author, and it is what the author is trying to convince us of. And if we got rid of the first and the third sentence, well, then the actual essence of why the author wrote this will still remain. Okay, now in the Imat, obviously the passage is going to be a lot longer than this, but really the difficulty itself isn't that much greater. Okay, so let's actually try doing a proper Imat style question. And this is what they will look like. So again, I want you to pause the video, try it yourself first, and I'm assuming you've done that now, so let's do it together. Okay, so what are our steps? Well, first of all, we read the question. We don't read the passage first, no, we read the question. Which one of the following best expresses the main conclusion of the above argument? Okay, it's a conclusion question, so we are going to put ourselves into conclusion mode and we are going to solve this problem. Okay, now we know what we're looking for. We're looking for a conclusion. So now we can read the passage and at the same time look for the conclusion. So let's do that now. The difficulties associated with getting older have lessened in recent years. The reasons for this include the improvements in technologies, such as personal home elevators, better medical equipment, and revolutionary medications. There is, however, another factor at play. The current generation of people over the age of 60 realize the importance of exercise in living a happy life. Since, okay, that is one of our indicator words, so we'll underline that. Since the elderly have shown continued dedication to regular exercise, we can expect, that's another trigger word, we can expect that many of the hardships associated with aging will continue to decline. Okay, already these two signal words have given it away. This here is the conclusion, and more specifically, it's this part here. We can expect that many of the hardships associated with aging will continue to decline. That is the most important opinion of this passage. Now, some people might think that it's this first sentence here, that the difficulties associated with getting older have lessened in recent years, that is the conclusion. But that's not the case. This is sort of just being taken as given. It's not what everything is building up to. It's not what all this evidence is about. No, they are building up to this, the fact that we can expect that many of the hardships associated with aging will continue to decline. It is the main opinion of the author, it is the reason they wrote the passage, that is, it's what they're trying to convince us of, and it's also the essence of the text. If we took away everything else but this sentence, well, then the main point of the author would still stand. Okay, now we just need to match this to one of the answers here. Okay, so let's do that. A, the difficulties associated with aging have declined. No, that's this first bit here, that's not the conclusion, so it's not going to be A. B, exercise frequency among the elderly can be expected to rise. No, it's saying that the elderly have shown continued dedication to regular exercise. It's not making any predictions on exercise increasing, so no, that can't be it. C, the difficulties associated with aging will continue to decline. Yes, that's exactly what we've underlined here. And this is why I recommend you underline the conclusion, because then you can just match the answer to what you've underlined. And in this case, it pretty much matches perfectly. So we know the answer is going to be C. Now, obviously, if this was the Imat, you wouldn't bother with D and E, you just move on, but I'll do them anyway. Okay, so D, medical and technological advances have reduced the difficulties of aging. No, that's not the conclusion. E, exercise is important in reducing the difficulties of aging. No, that's not what they're trying to convince us of. This is what they're trying to convince us of. This is just a fact. So no, it's not going to be E. The answer is C. Okay, if you didn't get that last one correct, don't worry, we will do another one now. So again, pause and attempt, and I'll assume you've done that now. Okay, let's get started. What's our first step? Well, as always, it's to read the question. Which one of the following best expresses the main conclusion of the above argument? Okay, it's a conclusion question. put yourself in conclusion mode. That means that you can now do the second step, which is to read the passage and look for the conclusion. So let's do that now. The war on drugs has over the past few decades been an utter failure when it comes to protecting the public from the dangers that illegal drugs present to our youth. However, compared to the damage that alcohol does to young people's health, our preoccupation with drugs is laughable. 10 times more young people die from alcohol-related causes as compared to deaths due to illicit drugs. Given this, okay, that's something that signifies that a conclusion is coming up. It's one of our signal words, so we'll underline that. It is obvious that alcohol needs to be treated the same way as any illegal narcotic, and all selling of alcohol should be made illegal. Drink driving, liver damage, domestic abuse, the list of alcohol-related problems is endless. Okay, so what is the main opinion of the author here? What is it they're trying to convince us of? Well, really it's this bit here. All selling of alcohol should be made illegal. That is what they wrote the passage for. It's their strongest opinion, and really underlining all these little signal words here gave it away. Whenever you see words like this that are trying to convince you of something or trying to convince you to do something, well, then you can be quite sure that the conclusion is coming up, most of the time at least. Okay, so this is our conclusion here. All selling of alcohol should be made illegal. Let's match that to one of the options. A. Alcohol kills more people than illegal drugs. No. B. The list of alcohol-related problems is considerable. No. C. The war on drugs has been a complete failure. No, that's definitely not the conclusion. D. Young people are at particular risk when it comes to the dangers of alcohol. No. E. The selling of alcohol needs to be made illegal. Yes, that's exactly what the conclusion is, and that's why it's so helpful to underline it. So the answer is E. Okay, hopefully you're getting the hang of this, and I'm going to do another one with you, and this one will be a bit more difficult than the others. Okay, so pause and attempt, and I'll assume you've done that now, so let's start. What's our first step? It's always to read the question. Don't rush. I know that you're under time pressure for the Imat, but you have to read the question first. Which one of the following best expresses the main conclusion of the above argument? Okay, we know we're looking for a conclusion. Then we read the passage and look for the conclusion. So let's do that now. Parents in several states have lobbied for the inclusion of more language classes in primary schools, citing the benefits that knowing a second language has on intelligence. This logic, however, is flawed, as while language learning on its own is beneficial, the parents are failing to consider the courses that will need to be sacrificed to make way for more language classes. There are only so many hours in a school day, and if teachers are going to add in a language class, then other subjects like mathematics and science will have their teaching time reduced. Mathematics and science are likely just as beneficial to children's development in intelligence, and teachers just cannot combine everything in a given week. Okay, this one was a bit more difficult because there aren't really any signal words here that indicate to us that a conclusion is coming. But it is still possible to identify the conclusion. Think to yourself, what is the most important opinion here? What is it that the author is trying to convince us of? Well, if you read the whole passage and you keep all that information in your head, you understand that it's this part here. This logic, however, is flawed, as while language learning on its own is beneficial, the parents are failing to consider the courses will need to be sacrificed to make way for more language classes. That is what they're trying to convince us of. The facts are this. The facts are that parents in several states are trying to actually get schools to teach more language, but they are missing something, and the author knows that they are missing something, so the author is giving his opinion or her opinion on why the parents have the wrong logic. And this is the conclusion here. Some people might think that it's this part here, that mathematics and science are likely just as beneficial to improve intelligence as language, but no, that's not what this whole passage is about. The passage is about the inclusion of more language classes and why that'll improve intelligence, and the author is saying that that is not true. So this is the conclusion. So this goes to show that you can't always rely on there being signal words. Sometimes you just have to think about it critically. You have to think about what the issue is and then think about what the author is actually trying to argue against or argue for. And whatever it is that the actual author is arguing for or against, that'll be the conclusion. Okay, so we've identified the conclusion. Let's match it to one of the answers. It's not going to be A, mathematics and science are just as beneficial as language learning. No, that's this part here, and that was not the conclusion. B, the inclusion of more language courses will not necessarily improve children's intelligence. Potentially, yes, that sounds right, but I won't mark it just yet. Now, this answer most likely is the conclusion, but because it doesn't exactly match what is written here, I'm going to check the other answers first to make sure there's not a better option. Okay, so let's check C. There is no room for language classes in primary school. No, the author isn't arguing that there's no place for language in schools. That's not really the point of the passage, so it's definitely not C. What about D? Teachers' schedules are already filled. Okay, now a lot of people would probably pick D. And the reason D is incorrect is because while it actually is true that the teacher's schedules are filled, that is not the main conclusion. That is not what this whole passage is about. We aren't arguing about teachers having filled schedules or not. No, we are arguing about learning a second language and the impact on intelligence. And what the author is arguing is that intelligence will not be increased due to it resulting in, more courses having to be dropped. So no, it's not D. It sounds sort of correct, but that is not the answer. Okay, moving on to E. Learning another language has no benefit to intelligence. No, that's not at all what the author is arguing. So the correct answer is B. Okay, I know this one was a bit more difficult, but if you can do this question, you're pretty much set for conclusions. Really, they don't get much harder than this. Okay, with that, I think we can wrap up this video. Really, there's nothing more for me to teach you. Now you just need to practice. And really, once you've practiced enough, you will soon master the skill. And then once the Imat comes, there'll be nothing that the Imat writers can do to throw you off.